Good morning, everyone, and welcome to October's Audit Committee. Do we have any apologies?
There are no apologies, Convener.
Do we have any declarations of interest? Then turn to the minutes. Has everybody read them? Do anybody have any issues with them?
Happy to agree, Convener.
Have a seconder? Thank you. Then we'll turn to the rolling action log.
Thank you, Convener. You'll see in the rolling action log, there are two reports or two items, both of which are reports that relating to the Legionella compliance update and Legionella compliance update. Both these reports were due for submission to this committee, and the reports are on the agenda, so they'll be picked up when we come to that item on the agenda, Convener.
Thank you. Do we have any other any queries, or will we just go straight to item 5? Item 5, if I can ask you to present the report as well, please.
Thanks, Convener. Good morning, everybody. This report seeks Audit Committee's approval of an updated internal audit charter. The charter sets out the role, authority and responsibility of the internal audit team. Section 4 of the report explains the considerations of the Public Sector Internal Audit Standards 2017. The standards require that all public sector internal audit providers establish an internal audit charter. Paragraph 4.2 confirms the charter as a high-level document. It sets out the role, the authority and responsibility of the internal audit team, and it must be approved by the Audit Committee. Paragraph 4.3 highlights that the standards are currently undergoing a review, with new standards anticipated in April 2025. Paragraph 5.3 confirms that if any related changes require it, the internal audit charter will be updated and brought back to committee. The charter was last approved in November 2022 and reflects the joint working arrangements with Manager Council via a consolidated charter. The updated version is attached to Appendix 1. For ease of reading, the table in paragraph 5.2 summarises the amendments that have been made since the previous 2022 version. The committee is therefore asked to consider and approve the internal audit charter attached to Appendix 1. Thank you.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, Isabel. Councillor Meikle-John.
Thank you, Convener. I was just wondering if, firstly, if Isabel could maybe highlight any of the significant changes to the charter, just so that we're clear. There's obviously been reference to typographical changes, etc., which are going to be minor changes, but is there any significant changes that we should really be aware of, and if you're able to highlight those?
Thank you. Isabel?
Yeah, there aren't really any significant changes as such, because the process for internal audit hasn't changed. It's more been about tidying up, so things like job titles, just making things a bit clearer. So there's a couple of references in there to fraud. It's making that a bit wider in terms of the paragraph that was there, but nothing that changes any process or is of significance. I think probably the thing I would say so more is the sentence beneath the table, the bit about the changes that are potentially coming and the fact that the charter will have to come again. The global standards are changing. They're in consultation just now. For local government, there's a code of practice as well. So we're being asked to look just now at both the standards and the code of practice that will go along with that. That date's going to be April 2025. I can't say at the moment what the changes will be until obviously the consultation has finished and there's a finalised version, but it is anticipated that there will be significant changes, and that will then mean that that charter needs updated. Thank you. Just a follow-up on that, Convener. There's no internal audit are subject to external assessment every 5 years. Can ask where we are in that process, if that is due within the near future, or when it last took place. Yeah, so the external review is every 5 years. We're a bit longer than 5 years. So the reviewing body is another local authority. So I'm part of a group of nationally where all the local authorities who want to be involved look at each other, so they peer assess and do those assessments for each other, basically. That requires the capacity of that local authority to be able to do that. So things like absence, staff turnover, may have an impact on that. So that review is underway. It has been underway for a few months, and we're anticipating it will be ready to come to the next audit committee. Thank you.
Can I ask who our peer local authority is?
Yeah, by council.
Thank you.
Thank you, Isabel. Does anyone else have questions? No? Happy to agree the item, the report?
Agreed.
Okay. And we move to item 6. I think again it's you, Isabel.
Yes, it is. Thanks, Kavina. The purpose of this report is to provide an update on where we are with completing our 24-25 internal audit plan. It also sets out the status of the remaining assignments to be completed from the 23-24 internal audit plan. Paragraphs 3.1 and 3.2 highlight the status with the assignments from the 23-24 plan, including the summary reported at the last committee in June. This confirmed that 1 audit review was in progress, 3 audit reviews were deferred into the 24-25 plan, and there were 2 additions to the plan. The 24-25 internal audit plan was agreed by Audit Committee in April 24. Paragraph 3.3 sets out the workload, including the other client work undertaken. Paragraph 3.3 also summarises what 24-25 audit reports have been completed, are at draft report stage, in progress, and are still to be started. A summary of progress relating to the 20 assignment areas, as well as the remaining 23-24 audits, can be seen at Appendix 1. Appendix 2 summarises the findings arising from the 2 assignments in 24-25 that have been finalised via an internal audit report. I'd like to draw your attention to paragraph 3.5, which provides committee with details on the number of recommendations which are outstanding beyond their agreed implementation dates, which are recorded on Pintana. Details of these recommendations can be found at Appendix 4. Paragraphs 3.6 to 3.9 explain the work undertaken by internal audit and by the Senior Service Manager for Housing and Communities in relation to council tax refunds. This was in response to the Aberdeen City Council embezzlement case. Finally, I'd ask members to note the recommendations and conclusions. That is, the team are making reasonable progress with finalising the remaining audit work in the 23-24 internal audit plan, and also with completing the 24-25 internal audit plan. Members should also note that internal audit resource may change over the course of the year, and so the plan must always be considered flexible. Thank you, and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Isabel. Councillor Meikle-John.
Thank you, Convener. I just wanted to ask a wee bit about the audit of the council's buildings and security arrangements. And I'm aware that there's obviously been some unauthorised accesses granted to the council through that. I appreciate it's probably only a small sample, but I think it would be helpful to have a complete overview of where we have issues. I go back to I think 2015-16 when I was aware of the last occasion that particular piece of work was done, and I'm a bit concerned that we are still seeing the same issues arising in the same particular facilities that we did at that time. I'm also aware that there's been a lot of movement and changes, and we have some public buildings now that we perhaps didn't have, but we also have some non-public buildings that may well be subject to that. There was also a concern recently over an unauthorised access of a member of the public to a school. And I just wondered if you could give me some assurance about how we're going to deal with that, and that obviously that particular areas where there's vulnerable people, that there's going to be additional safeguards put in place.
Isabel? In the first instance, unless we have anyone here from Children's Services that can answer.
I'm happy to just to give a summary of the audit and see if I can answer. Is that
Okay,
okay?
it's I'm just concerned that there's no one here from Children's Services when this is actually part of the report.
Yeah.
Okay, Isabel, go ahead.
Okay, so you'll see that we looked at 18 buildings. We tried to look at all different services. We also visited some sites that we had visited before and where we had gained access. So unfortunately, we gained access to 4 of those buildings again. This is actually the 5th time, I think, that we have undertaken this audit. Where there's repeated access issues, you know, we will keep going back to that to make sure that things are improving. After the last audit, there was more of a corporate approach about being able to approach people, and that people should feel more confident in doing so. But in this audit, the 6 places that we did get into, that was still an issue where our auditors were able to wander around the buildings in amongst vulnerable service users, school pupils. They had access to vehicles that were left running. Some had keys still in the ignition. This is obviously all unacceptable. For us to gain access to one premises or vehicle is a risk for something to happen. So the recommendations that have been made are very specific to the sites where we visited, but also there's the corporate oversight required. And as part of the accepting of the recommendations, there has definitely been a corporate view taken about the communications around security of buildings and making it a priority. So there are very easy steps, things like making sure that staff are wearing their passes at all times, that visitors have a visitor pass and they're escorted at all times. But there were some very specific things around training, for example, people getting access to buildings before their training started and them not being with somebody who is escorting them or being responsible for them. So there's a definite will to make this better, and it will be an internal audit will obviously happen again to ensure that those recommendations are being actioned. I don't know if anybody else wants to come in and say any more. The only other thing I would say at that point is that those 6 were across all the different sites that we have. So that included pupils, it included vulnerable service users. So it is very significant, I would say.
Thank you, Isabel. Karen?
Thank you, Convener. With particular reference to the school that Isabel's referring to, I do know that there was a site visit following the audit on the back of receiving Isabel's team's findings from that audit. So there was a site visit undertaken very quickly thereafter. There was a walk round the whole school to assess entry and exit areas, and there's been guidance issued across the school. We can certainly take back to the director a question for any more information on that, but just to provide committee with a level of assurance that the service did take some action on the back of that particular audit.
Thank you, Karen. I believe, Paul, you wish to say something?
Yes, Convener, on the specific of the one relating to the school, I do understand, as Karen says, that the service have been engaging with pupils. It was in relation to a fire exit which had been left open. So there has been engagement with pupils on the importance of not leaving fire exits open, and staff signage has been posted or has been posted, fire exits should sound an alarm in the caretaker's office. It's not a council-run facility, it's an NPDO facility, and door closers are being ensured that they are working on operational and off fire exits on that specific. But as Isabel mentions, there has to be a corporate approach as to how we manage our buildings from a security perspective and have a set of standards that apply to them all as there would be with any other compliance. And as part of the remit of the property compliance group, we've added security to the agenda on the basis of the findings of the audit report.
Thank you, Paul. Councillor Meikle-John.
Can I just come back with a supplementary on that to ask if we are going to look at having a corporate policy around security of buildings? I don't know whether that would necessarily need to be a policy, but certainly a procedure that's for the operation of our buildings. That way that there's a consistency across all sites.
Thank you, Councillor Meikle-John. Paul, would you like to?
It wasn't a specific recommendation from the audit report, but certainly best practice would suggest that we should be having a consistent corporate approach to how we manage security, and premises managers will be given that as part of their premises managers training, but also in part of the premises manager handbook will be emphasising that. They should have a security risk assessment in effect for every building.
Thank you, Paul. Councillor Hannah, do you have anything?
Can I just ask if going forward, because we are going to be looking at greater community access to some of our school buildings, and is it going to be ensured that there are suitable arrangements put in place to ensure security?
The short answer is yes. We'll be well aware of the sports wings provisions, as we've seen in other schools across the country. The use of zoning, maglocks, ensure that we can restrict access to certain areas at certain times of the day. But the key thing is people behaviours and premises managers ensuring that these security measures are operational and they're implemented effectively.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else? Councillor Patrick.
Yes, thank you, convener. I think probably most of my concerns and questions really have been answered. It seems that this topic's really been taken quite seriously. Schools is obviously the major concern I would have, but also perhaps a more experience of how we're taking access to the foundry. And again, I think I'm pleased to hear that we're perhaps looking into what more we need to do to tighten up on that, because I think it's quite easy just to probably tailgate walking behind somebody, and certainly a concern that if we have a training starting at 9 but staff and reception perhaps aren't starting till 9 either, how do we deal with that? But I feel that we are getting some assurance that these issues are being looked into already, so I don't really have any further questions at the moment. Thank you, convener.
Thank you, Councillor Patrick. Councillor Forrest.
Just a wee change of tack away from the security, if I may. On page 26, the report notes that there's the internal audit are undertaking work on behalf of Strathcarron Hospice, Clackmannanshire Council, as well as a fraud review for Aberdeen City Council. What's been the impact on the internal audit's resources? Have we got sufficient resources for carrying all these out?
So we do work for Strathcarron Hospice and we do work for Clackmannanshire Council. The Aberdeen City Council piece of work wasn't anything to do with Aberdeen City Council. That was a piece of work entirely that we felt that we wanted to review because of what had happened at Aberdeen City Council and the £1 million embezzlement fraud that they had incurred, and we wanted to make sure that our controls in place for our council tax refunds would not allow that to happen. So that was a separate piece of work and it was a completely internal review. The Clackmannanshire Council work that we do, it also incorporates the Clackmannanshire and Stirling Integration Joint Board and also the Central Scotland Valuation Joint Board. So we provide audit services for all three of those, as well as Falkirk Council, as well as the Falkirk Pension Fund and Strathcarron Hospice. So there are 6 different client groups there, if you like. We are a very small team, so it takes a lot of juggling and scheduling to make that work happen. So resourcing is always an issue, more so when there are any absences or there's staff turnover. But that's why, you know, I try to always say that the audit plan is flexible. It has to be to make sure that things that come across the bow are taken into account and prioritised. We look at the risk and have a look to make sure to see if what we've got in the plan is doable, and also if things have to move around to take into account some other piece of significant work. And hopefully that goes a wee bit to answering.
Thank you, Isabel.
Through you, convener. Thank you, Isabel. That's very helpful, and my apologies if I confused the issue with the Aberdeen City Council. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I ask Amanda?
Thank you, convener. Just to add to what Isabel said, I think we've talked about in previous committees that we were going to have to do a review of the position around Client Manager Council in particular, and in terms of joint working arrangement that we have, agreement that we have with them, just to see what's sustainable going forward. So we're in the middle of doing that. We've had some discussions with our colleagues at Client Manager Council. We've drafted a paper that will take firstly to CMT, and we're just trying to finalise that. So we are very mindful of the impact that all of that work is having on the Falkirk team and on the audit plan. So we are looking to see what solutions we can propose and what options we can come up with to make sure that we're mitigating that as much as possible.
Thank you, Amanda. Councillor Hannah?
Thank you. Again, on another point, in page 27, there's details of council tax refunds made and a review of the council tax refunds made. Now, it's reassuring that none of the refunds were found to have been fraudulent, but it's something of concern that this was a review that found refunds, that was reviewing refunds that had been made over a period of 12 years. Can we be assured that A, there's more regular reviewing of this, and B, what are the lessons that have been learned from what has happened, and what will we be doing in the future to ensure that the situation is picked up if there are any problems?
Oh, Ferguson?
Yes, good morning. So just to provide some reassurance to Councillor Hannah, the review did not find anything, and I think Falkirk Council has historically used additional safeguards for refunds beyond what the software providers give us, which is a dual control and good integrity and bank details being pre-populated by the direct debit instructions. So we have that existing in the report that's provided. There's a commitment to review this every 2 years alongside the non-rated rates refunds, which are again a much smaller number but are similar in value to council tax. And I think that obviously, having personally reviewed the data that was provided very extensively from the audit team, I am satisfied that our controls are robust, but I'm not complacent, and we'll continue to review that every 2 years, if not sooner, if any issues arise. But certainly from what we found, there was no suspicion of fraud, there was no errors made, and the controls that we have in place, it seemed to be testament that those are actually effective and fit for purpose.
Thank you, convener.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions on this item?
Convener,
Councillor Meikle-John.
could I just ask our Health and Social Care Chief Officer a question around the outstanding recommendations for health and social care, particularly around the management of monies and for residents, etc. Because they're out with time scale, and I just wondered if there was a particular reason for that. And I now note that the implementation date is February, but the Short Life Working Group is only just really been convened relatively soon. So I just wondered if Gillian was in a position to be able to give an update on that.
Thanks, Councillor Meikle-John. I don't think we've got anyone there from the social care, so if officers could take that back, provide us with an answer. Could I ask if there's an update regarding the Bonus Recreation Centre?
Hi, yeah, no problem. That was one of the pieces of work that was added into the 23-24 work programme. The bonus work is underway. It's at a draft report stage now. It did take longer than anticipated, but more around the logistics of the people who were involved in us trying to get all the facts together no longer work for the council. So trying to get that information has been by every means possible to make sure that we're building up the full picture of what happened, so that when we present our findings, they are obviously as accurate as possible to try and work out what happened and how, if there are any improvements, what lessons learned there are and how we go forward from there. So that has taken longer to get there. Plus, in the middle of all of that, there were holidays and just trying to get people at different times. There were a lot of interviews conducted. We conducted in excess of 12 different interviews with people. So there's been a lot of information to sift through to get to a point of a draft report. That draft report is sitting with me for review. So I would expect that you would definitely have something coming back to the next committee.
Thank you, Isabel. Could I lastly from me ask the same of the Madison Primary School?
Yes, Madison is quite similar in the sense that there's been a lot of information to trawl through and to get clear facts on, because Madison goes back to something like 2016-17. So there's been a lot of years there to get all the different bits and pieces together. I feel like it's been a bit, both of them have been a bit like a jigsaw, and you're just trying to fit all the pieces in and trying always to find that last piece that will get you to where you need or give you the answers you're looking for. So Madison is more ahead than Bowness in the sense that the draft report has been issued and that has gone to senior officers in the council, and we are currently waiting for some final comments to come back on our suggested recommendations, and once those responses are in, that report will be issued, and again that's one that will definitely be coming to the next committee.
Thank you, Isabel. Do we have any other final questions? No? Then can I ask if we can agree this report?
Agreed.
Thank you. I think we need to take a 5-minute recess. Thank you. Moving on to item 7, the Legionella compliance update. I'm basically going to initially present a small statement, and then if there are any questions, we'll take it from there. Legionella has been a focus of the Audit Committee since June 23, and several updates since then have been provided to the committee. Internal Audit provided 21 recommendations in the initial in December 23, March 24. And as we've seen in the internal audit progress report earlier, 8 of these recommendations remain outstanding. The internal audit manager, has already confirmed that these are under review and will be followed up. However, in regard to the report from the committee, I would just like to say these following few words. In November 23, the committee requested that the head of investment, Falkirk, completes a property compliance report which detailed the council's compliance with its statutory duties, to be presented today at today's committee meeting. In February 24, the committee requested again that this report be brought to an audit committee in September. This report was to include all recommendations, agreed action updates, including their completion dates alongside the agreed internal timescales and the lessons learned. The report provided to the committee today regretfully does not meet these requests. Therefore, as convener, I'm going to ask the committee not to consider this report today and to ask the director to provide at our next meeting the reports that the committee asked for. I would also just like to make clear to all senior officers that I and the committee expect when it calls for reports, these are provided and contain the information as requested. That having been said, I would like personally to commend the work that's actually gone into the report and ask Mr. Kettrick to provide a brief overview of the current position regarding the recommendations. Okay.
Thank you, Convener. As members of the committee will note, all actions identified in the previous audit are complete, and where appropriate, actions continue to be implemented. For clarity, all actions, state again, that were identified to be complete by the 10th of September date, which was the final outstanding action, have been completed. And following that initial completion, there continues to be actions taken to ensure that high levels of compliance and a comprehensive and robust approach to the management of Legionella is adopted. It is important to note that some actions will always remain ongoing. For instance, premises managers change regularly, and as staff leave roles and roles change. The key consideration for managing Legionella compliance is to ensure that all premises managers are registered, for instance, they're provided training and support, and the approach adopted that we have now implemented ensures that we have the mechanisms in place on an ongoing basis that the support is provided to premises managers to ensure that our facilities are statutorily and regularly compliant as in relation to water quality. In relation to lessons learned, whilst there is no specific section in the report, it is clear that there is one lesson that the Council's approach to Legionella management or water quality was not fully adequate previously. However, I'm pleased to advise members of the committee that the approach that has now been adopted through the work of the Property Compliance Group and colleagues, including Thomas Law, who is our dedicated water quality Legionella officer, continue to provide a robust and comprehensive approach to the management of water-based bacteria, and we mitigate the risks associated with them wherever possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Councillor Meikle-John.
Thank you, Convener. And first of all, I would just concur with your comments regarding the work that has already been undertaken, because there has been a huge amount of work that's been undertaken, and I think there appears to have been either a misunderstanding or a miscommunication about what it is the committee actually wanted, because we have, the outcome of the audit report, but it doesn't give the assurance in the way that the committee have asked for it. And I think that's where we've kind of got into a bit of a challenge, and that's what the audit committee is about, that we need to satisfy that we've got an assurance that the practice and processes and the outcomes that we asked for are being carried out. So it's unfortunate that we've got to this position, but I do agree that I think I would want a wee bit more detail in relation to the Legionella, about the number of buildings that have now all been tested, the compliance, where there's non-compliance, the actions that have been taken to do that. And I'm really pleased to hear some of the assurances that has been given by Mr. Kettrick and indeed his colleague with regard to the training around the premises managers. But we need to have the assurance that that will be something that will be able to be sustained and ongoing. But ultimately, it's about making sure that all our premises are safe. So I think there has been just some kind of misunderstanding or miscommunication. Perhaps committee hasn't been clear in what it's the specifics that we wanted, and I think that's maybe what we now need to go back and do.
Thank you, Councillor Meikle-John. Paul?
In my statement, and it's highlighted in the report, the primary recommendation for ourselves, or the actions coming out of the action report, was to go through those actions and put in place risk mitigation measures associated with those actions. And I'm certainly of the view, as our colleagues, that has been undertaken and all those actions are complete.
Thank you, Paul. Councillor Hannah?
Thank you, Convener. I mean, I want to I just echo what's been said. I think officers have done a great deal of work on this, and they're to be commended for doing that. And I'm really pleased to welcome a dedicated officer to work on this particular. It is important. But there is obviously, as Councillor Meikle-John has said, some disconnect in our understanding, since officers appear to think that they have complied, and the committee thinks that that has not been fully complied with our requests. So I think it's important that we have clarity on that. And I think it is important that we have a much more detailed report back on what has been done, what is being done, where we're compliant and where we're not.
Thank you, Councillor Hannah. Paul, do you wish to say any further?
I would just reiterate again, Convener, that the report presented today highlights that all the actions identified in the audit report have been completed, and there is ongoing activity associated with them, which would be the normal course of matter for the management of Legionella water quality in our properties.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Spears?
Thank you. If I can take you to page 50, 7.3, the legal aspects. The implications of this report and its recommendations will ensure that the Council continues to mitigate against any legal action that could arise from any failures to safeguard the users of its properties in relation to water quality / Legionella. I think we were very explicit, to be honest, previously, and what kind of report we wanted back. We want a report on the actions that's been taken. Now that we have our house in order and people in place, we really want to know what actions have been taken, so we can reassure the public, and especially parents with children attending our schools, that these actions are clearly in place. Now, I'm fully realise that this is a major job. It comes down to like cleaning every shower head, checking every tank. But it's vitally important, especially with the amount of viruses and stuff that's going around nowadays, that we are 100% meeting these legal implications that were stated in 7.3.
Thank you, Councillor Spears. Paul, do you wish anything to add?
It's highlighted in the report. The approach that we have to Legionella now ensures that we are mitigating the risks as much and as reasonably as possible could be expected from an estate the size of ours, and therefore we feel that we do have the appropriate measures in place, that if there was ever an incident, which we feel would be unlikely, given the approach that we have, that we would be able to mitigate the risk of any legal action being taken against us.
Can I just clarify that we have a very robust cyclical maintenance programme in place using an external contractor where all properties get regularly inspected and serviced. I audit that, and any gaps or failures are picked up very rapidly on a continual basis. That makes us legally compliant under all the current legislation.
Thank you. Councillor Meikle-John.
Convener, can I make a suggestion that perhaps yourself and perhaps Mr Perry meet with officers to look at what information the committee are looking for to come back to the next meeting, so that there is a clear understanding and that will fulfil what it is that members are actually seeking.
Thank you, Councillor Meikle-John. That was actually going to be my suggestion. As most people know, my previous background to becoming a councillor, I was a safety compliance auditor, and I am Legionella certificated. So I would be more than happy to sit down with Brian Perry and the new members of our team and make sure that everything is what the committee is looking for. Thank you. Do we have any other questions? No. Then can we agree to move to the next item? Okay.
Agreed.
Thank you. The next item then is item 8, Risk Management Assurance Annual Plan. Amanda?
Thank you, Convener. The report presented today is the Annual Risk Management Assurance Report. It covers the period April 2023 to September 24, but future reports will be prepared on a financial year basis. There's just been a timing issue this year. The annual report itself is presented at Appendix 1 of the paper, and that starts on page 71 of the agenda. And following this consideration of the report at this meeting, we will post this report online in the CRM section of the Council's website. The report itself covers corporate risk assurance and service risk assurance with 3 key actions under each area, and it summarises some of the main sources that CMT have used to assess the effectiveness of the corporate risk management arrangements, and that includes the corporate risk register updates, the West Lothian review of risk, and also the annual governance statement. And of course, all the services had to provide detailed assurance statements to help create that annual governance statement. And the Audit Committee considered the annual governance statement as part of the June Audit Committee meeting. So a summary of progress to date with each of the actions is included in the paper, and some priorities and actions for 24-25 are also noted. So that includes things that the committee should be aware of already, improvements to how risk is presented in our committee reports, continuing to work and improve the measurable actions which support achievement of target risk levels in the corporate risk register and for the specialist risk registers. And we are, as we've reported before, seeing improvements in those measurable action plans. And then finally, completion of training needs analyses for services and encouraging the use of the e-learning risk module, and that would include for members. So those actions reflect in part the nature of the risk management landscape in this complex organisation. It is a process of continually reviewing our approach, ensuring it's appropriate, flexible and robust enough for the organisation. We have made quite a number of improvements in recent years, and for that I'd like to thank the Risk Management Coordinator and the Internal Audit Risk and Corporate Fraud Manager, but also officers from across the Council who have been very supportive in implementing the recommendations that we have made through our risk management improvement plans. And on that, I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda. Councillor Meikle-John.
Thank you, Convener. I don't know who's best placed to answer this particular question, whether it be Mr. Laurier and Mrs. Templeman. Could either of you explain how the Council has improved or progressed how it manages risk, remembering that we have that highest risks now than we've ever had in the past?
So we, over the course of the last 18 months, we've made a number of changes in how we are considering risk at a corporate level. And a big part of that was disbanding the Corporate Risk Management Working Group, which we didn't feel was working as effectively as it should. So I think one of the key changes that we've made is having that very regular quarterly update of risk that's coming to the corporate management team with clarity in terms of roles and responsibilities that the corporate management team are responsible for monitoring risk. So I think the process of pulling those reports together, which involves all of the services providing updates, those updates are scrutinised by our risk management coordinator. There's challenge back and forward. It's coordinated through the business management coordinators so that by the time it's coming to CMT, we've got a more robust reflection of what the services view of risk is. And I think the improvements that the risk management coordinator and the internal audit risk and fraud manager have made in terms of presentation of those reports has helped to make the consideration of those reports at CMT better and a sort of smoother process, if you like. I think as well, we have been looking for certain key pieces of work. So if you think about financial strategy, for example, we had quite a significant section in there on risk, and we were linking it back to the corporate risk register. We were linking it back to our target risk, the challenges in meeting that target risk. So we are hoping that through the committee report changes that we will see more of that. We will link better into the corporate risk register and be linking better in terms of the recommendations and the decisions and how those impact or not taking them impacts on risks within the corporate risk register. And then I suppose the final thing I think is something that we are developing, but I think actually if we could get it working a bit better, it would be much more helpful, is the we had agreed that in advance of executive, where they get the 6 monthly corporate risk registers to review, we would have a session with the executive to be able to go through that in a little bit more detail, opportunity for members to scrutinise, to ask questions, for us to go to refine that risk register, to take into account members' views before it comes to executive. We've had 2 of those sessions so far. The attendance hasn't been, particularly for the second one, wasn't as good as we might have wanted. But I think if we could try and improve that process, that will also help to improve the scrutiny of the corporate risk register, particularly at executive.
Thank you. Thank you, Amanda. Being mindful, convener, that risk is everybody's responsibility throughout the organisation at whatever level they may be. Elected members have to manage that particular risk as well. And it's important that members are able to understand fully the extent of those risks associated, particularly with the decision making. Can you advise if there's any scope for creating greater links with the information that's within the reports to members, whether that be executive or council, and relating the risks associated with the corporate risks, and being able to ensure that we can do that triangulation going forward? And also potentially the use of heat maps around horizon scanning for future risks that we need to start to take into account, particularly when we're in such a volatile financial climate. And indeed, as I would also just point policy environment as well, with potential changes coming around budgets. I don't know whether that's maybe one for Mr. Laurie, or whether he's going to delegate that to Amanda.
Well, Amanda might wish to comment on this as well. Thank you, convener. I mean, I suppose to build on what Amanda was just saying, it feels to me that we've come quite a long way in this regard, because I think that not that long ago, whilst there was good work being done on risk, the presentation of it, both at the CMT level and also to elected members, was actually a bit bureaucratic and a bit confusing. And it was hard to see the clarity of how risk was playing into that broader corporate agenda. And I think we have made a lot of progress on that. I think, having said that, and as this perhaps picks up on your point, Councillor Meaky John, I think there is more that we can do. And I think that, particularly if you think round about the challenges we have, for example, in the financial strategy, that whole piece around about horizon scanning, understanding the interplay between that and the risk environment we face, and kind of making really clear and good decisions, well, good recommendations, clearly based on risk, and good decisions on the back of that is really important. So there is more that we can do. And now that we have, I think, a much better and clearer process at CMT for considering all of these issues, that's certainly something we can take back into that discussion in terms of improving that presentation and engagement with elected members. I don't know if Amanda wants to add to that.
I think the only thing I would add is that we do ask services to look at horizon scanning as part of their quarterly assurance statements that they provide. I think that was also something that we were hoping to draw out of the member sessions with sort of before executive consideration of the risk register as well. So I think that is an area where we can make some improvements.
Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda. Thank you, Kenneth. Councillor Hannah.
Thank you, convener. Just a fairly simple and straightforward. I've been having read a great many reports since I became a councillor, as we all have. There are some of the reports that come forward with fairly detailed risk sections, and there are others where, to be honest, it's a kind of generic, almost meaningless section. I wonder if there is some way of ensuring that all reports have a much more detailed risk section, or if that's not achievable.
Brian.
Thanks, Councillor Hannah. Yes, that's exactly what we're looking to do. The review of standing orders at the end of last year, going into this year, looked at or discussed report format, and risk was one of the areas that we want to make sure we improve on in reports. The format of the report won't change, but the information contained by or put in by officers will be more detailed, based around, I think Councillor Meikle-John mentioned, what's the risk of doing something, what's the risk of not doing something, but tying into the risk register. So what's the impact of doing this on the risks broadly across the council? And we'll factor in all the points that were made this morning by members as well. And that should be coming forward quite soon.
Okay, thank you, convener.
Thank you, Brian. Does anyone else have any other questions they wish to raise? No? Then can I ask the committee to approve this report?
Agreed.
Thank you. Then can we move on to item 9, report to members and the Controller of Audit. Can I ask who's presenting this report?
Hi, morning. Yes, it's me, Pauline Gillan from Audit Scotland. I'll be presenting the annual audit report to you today. If I could first of all ask you to turn to page 66 of the papers, that's Appendix 2, which is our covering letter. So members will have seen this letter at the conclusion of previous audits, and you'll see that it's addressed to this audit committee as those charged with governance under ISA 260. As in previous years, the most important thing to point out in this covering letter is at paragraph 1, where I confirm that the audit of the 23-24 annual report and accounts is now substantially complete, and subject to receiving final set of signed accounts, I'll be in a position to sign a clean audit opinion for the council, hopefully at the end of today. The proposed independent auditor's report is attached to Appendix A for your information. Under ISA 260, I'm required to bring to the committee's attention any significant findings that have arisen as part of our audit, and I'll come on to those in a second when I go on to the annual audit report itself. I'm also required to report to you any unadjusted misstatements in the accounts that we identified during the course of audit, and those are any that exceed our reporting threshold of £340,000. And there were 3 misstatements above that reporting threshold that management have chosen not to correct in the accounts, and we are content with that decision given that they are well below materiality level of £17 million. I'm also required to confirm from this committee when I'm presenting my report that you're not aware of any instances of actual suspected or alleged fraud, any events after the date of the financial statements, that's the 31st of March, or any material non-compliance with laws and regulations affecting the council should be brought to my attention. Nothing's been brought to my attention thus far, but I'll just pause for a second to confirm that that remains the case. Okay, I'll continue. You'll also see at Appendix B of this covering letter is the draft letter of representation, which is prepared under ISA 580, and that is to be signed by the Section 95 officer at the same time as the accounts are signed, and it just contains a number of management assurances to me as the appointed auditor, and it's similar format to previous years. Just to note that the papers we're bringing to you today also cover the Temperance Trust, and the equivalent covering papers for the Temperance Trust are Appendix 5 of your papers. I'm joined today at committee by Gillian McCready, who's the Senior Audit Manager for the Council Audit, but she is also the appointed auditor for the Temperance Trust. And at the conclusion of my presentation, she'll be happy to take any questions you have on the Trust. If we now move on to the annual audit report itself, which is back at page 7 of your papers. I'll take it as read, so I won't go through it in too much detail. The annual audit report summarises the work that the audit team carried out during the 23-24 audit of both the Council and the Temperance Trust. Page 3 details the key messages from this work, covering the audit of the annual report and accounts themselves, but also touches on best value and the 4 wider areas that frame public sector audit in Scotland. If you turn first of all to Exhibit 2 of the report, this exhibit outlines the key findings from the audit that I consider necessary to bring to your attention. The covering paper prepared by a Section 95 officer outlines some of these in a bit of detail, so I won't go through them in too much detail at this point. I think it's safe to say that all 5 of the matters are related to technical accounting issues, and we've tried to explain them in as simple a way as possible without putting too much narrative in the table. The first 2 of those relate to valuation of non-current assets in the accounts. You can see the first one there relates to 90 council dwellings that had been overstated in the accounts, resulting in overstatement of £2.8 million. As that error is well below our materiality level of £17 million, we're content that management have chosen not to make that adjustment in the accounts. But you'll see there that we have a recommendation in for next year, which management have accepted. You'll see that in the action plan at the end of the report. The second item there also relates to non-current assets, and it's to do with the revaluation of assets before they're transferred into the assets held for sale category. So as I said, error is below materiality, and we're content that the adjustment has not been made in the accounts, but there's an associated recommendation in the action plan for that one. Issue number 3 is a bit more complicated, and you can see that by the amount of narrative we've had to include there, and it relates to a variety of accounting entries for the pension fund this year. Members may recall that last year we were in a unique situation which hadn't been experienced previously, where there was a surplus, there was an asset in the pension fund. Under accounting regulations, the council and public bodies are not permitted to recognise the entirety of that asset on the balance sheet. Therefore, there are a number of technical adjustments that the actuary has to do in order for the figures in the balance sheet to be correct, and they're prepared under IFRIC 14. The council received the report from the actuary to allow them to prepare those figures in the accounts, but it was an early version of the report, and some of the figures then subsequently were changed from being received by the council at the end of April to then a further report being issued on the 29th of May, and there were a number of changes in that report that required adjustments to the accounts. The majority of them relate to the recognition of the pension asset, and you'll see there in the resolution column we've highlighted, just for simplicity, the various adjustments that were required to the accounts. There was also an adjustment required in relation to the unfunded pensions. Last year, as a result of the surplus, it's safe to say that practitioners, auditors and actuaries were a bit behind the curve with this in a technical sense, because it was very new. And by the time the council's accounts last year had been signed, after that there was a revision to some of the guidance about how we recognise unfunded pension liabilities. And you'll see there that's been corrected this year, but also at the number 4, the prior year adjustment, we requested a prior year adjustment for the unfunded amount that appeared last year, because that had been incorrectly classified, and at over £30 million exceeded materiality. Therefore, a prior year adjustment was made in the accounts. And finally, the final adjustment there, again, is very much a technical accounting adjustment in the movement and reserve statement. We're content it makes no impact in the bottom line of the accounts. I'm content that management have not made changes to the accounts with respect to that, but you will see there's a recommendation in there in the action plan for management to consider treatment next year. Moving on to Exhibit 3, this outlines the one significant risk and material misstatement that we included in our annual audit plan earlier in the year, and it relates to the standard risk for management's ability to override systems of control to manipulate the financial statements. That's a standard risk, and you'll see there we have a variety of assurance procedures that the audit team carried out during the year to address the risk. And in the final column there, you see that we've concluded that we did not identify any issues with the work that we carried out with regard to that. In our annual audit plan, we also highlighted 2 areas of audit focus for us, and those were in relation to pensions and non-current assets. where there's a high level of reliance on experts and also significant adjustments and estimates in both those areas. And you'll see, as evidenced by that, that 4 of our audit issues related to these areas. However, we're content that the figures in the accounts are now accurate and the changes made by management are correct. The remainder of the report covers best value and wider dimension areas. I'll just touch briefly on some of those. We report on arrangements for best value, and we also summarise the findings from our thematic work on workforce innovation, which members will remember came to this committee back in June of this year. In the second section of the report, we make positive comments on financial management and medium to long-term planning, highlighting that 70% of planned savings were achieved in 23-24. We also note that reserves had increased by £57 million this year. However, this is primarily due to release of service concessions, which are backed by borrowing and do not represent a long-term solution to the Council's financial challenges and do not represent cash that's available to the Council. Aligned to that, the section on reserves in the report, we include a recommendation for the Council to formally refresh its reserve strategy and to publish this as a standalone document, just to improve transparency of the policy for use of reserves for members of the public. We note that the policy was formally refreshed back in 2012 and has been subject to consideration since then, namely as part of formation of financial plans and strategies and budgets. However, this process could be more formal and more explicit. So you'll see that we've got a recommendation in the action plan that's been accepted by management. At paragraph 61, we highlight 2 areas where financial controls could be improved. These are in relation to authorisation of journals and validation of employee numbers. You'll see there in the narrative at para 61, we carried out a couple of additional procedures during our audit to address these weaknesses, and we found no issues that we need to report to this committee. Moving on, in the section on financial sustainability, we highlight the revised financial strategy that was approved in September 2023, which covers a period to 2029, highlighting a funding gap of £64.4 million over the period. And we note that since time of writing our report, a revised financial strategy for the period to 29-30 has been considered by members, and that highlights a gap of £56.4 million after the application of a 7% council tax increase. The final section of the report is on use of resources, and we note the enhancement of performance reporting arrangements and also improvement in performance of over 60% of the LGBF indicators. We also note here the auditor for the Temperance Trust has included a comment on the lack of use of funds from the Trust for some years due to the restricted nature of its conditions. And she has included a recommendation for the Council and the trustees to explore options to make the funds accessible, recognising that this will require a legal solution. And again, we have an action plan point in with regard to that. So finally, moving on to the action plan itself, members will note that it's significantly longer than you would have seen in previous years. That's because we are combining a number of different action plans, including previous year's best values and also previous year's thematic best values. So the action plan probably feels a much weightier section of the report than you would have seen in previous years. We have 7 recommendations this year, and you can see in the action plan at the end of the report, 6 relating to the Council, and one of those, as I mentioned, relating to the Temperance Trust. We've also included the 6 recommendations that came from the Best Value Thematic Review back in June on workforce innovation, with the responses and the agreed actions from management there. We also report good progress on prior year recommendations from both the financial statements audit and from our previous year's best value work. I can see that the majority of them are now complete or are in progress. So I'll pause there, and Gillian and I are happy to take any questions either on the Council or on the Temperance Trust, but just want to take the opportunity to, on behalf of the team, to thank Amanda and her team and others at the Council who have provided assistance to the audit team over the year to get us into this position of being able to sign off the audit. So many thanks, and happy to take questions or comments. Thank you.
Thanks, Gillian. Councillor Meikle-John.
Thank you, and thank you to Pauline. It's a huge piece of work, obviously, annually preparing the council's accounts, and it's also very, very complex. I've got a few questions, but this be more appropriate to our officers. The report notes that the good progress we have had in addressing the recommendations to improve best value from 23-24. Can you maybe explain a wee bit more about how the council will build on this? And I don't know whether this, Kenneth, you might want to give your view on that.
Yes, thank you, convener. Thank you, Councillor Meikle-John. So we brought forward the report in relation to the Accounts Commission's findings for Falkirk. I think it was just in June's council. It was shortly before the general election. I feel it perhaps didn't get the scrutiny and attention it perhaps deserved. But I do think we've demonstrated really substantial progress since the previous best value audit in 2022. And what the report in front of us today, I think, identifies in terms of both the broader report itself, but also the updates and the action plans, is that we are continuing to work on these things. We recognise there's more improvement to be done. And I think that's across the range of actions, though, certainly from a senior officer perspective, there's that really clear focus on financial sustainability because it's such a risk for the council and such a crucial area for us to, develop our proposals and enable that kind of collaborative leadership, which will ultimately take this council to a position of financial sustainability. I suppose my thinking about this, it ties back a little bit to what I was saying about the improved approach to risk. And I think we have a real clarity about the way we deal with these things now, an openness in our discussions, a much more collaborative approach. And I think in terms of thinking about another aspect of the report, the performance management, we've made significant strides in terms of what we're doing and how we're reporting our progress. So I recognise that's quite a generic answer to what was quite a generic question, Councillor Meikle-John, but if there's any particular details you want me and others to follow up on, happy to do that.
I'm maybe going to draw that out a wee bit more in my next question, and you'll maybe understand why. The report highlights our funding gap of 64.4 million, and that's the figure that's in the papers for period 24 to 29. The meeting of the Audit Committee in November, you particularly noted that without a collaborative approach between all members, supported by officers, the council would not be in a position to become financially stable. And there are many difficult decisions ahead. It has to be accepted the council is in a serious financial position, and there has to be some very difficult decisions ahead of us in order to create that financial stability. Can you just say a wee bit more with regard to those challenges in relation to the collaboration that is really needed to get the council back into that financially stable position?
Yes, thank you. I mean, I think as was noted by Pauline, we've had a further update in terms of financial strategy at the meeting of the council earlier this month, which shows a gap of 56.2 million on the basis of 7% council tax rise each year. But I think, and the figure I have in mind, just looking at hand, is we've still got 21.6 million in terms of a gap where we haven't yet identified savings. Now, clearly, that gap can be made up by a number of means. A bold strategy on council tax, a series of challenging and difficult decisions which need to be taken, which of course are included already in the savings which have been identified. And also, though it has a lesser impact, our approach to fees and charges, which we've reviewed and continue to review. But given the fine balances politically in the council, we only get the decisions that are needed by members coming together across the political divide. So whether the proposals being brought forward by officers, whether it's these proposals or whether it's other proposals that collaborative leadership amongst elected members can help us develop and take forward, there is a lot of that still to come, both in terms of the, as I say, the savings identified and the fact there's still a gap of 21.6 million to find. And Pauline also spoke about the position with service concessions and the use of service concessions as a means to bridge the gap on an annual basis only delays the difficult decisions and undermines our ability to take a planned approach to dealing with the financial crisis that we face. We're also, all members are obviously very clearly aware that if we can bridge the financial gap quickly, and the approaches as officers were talking about, and those of you that were at the financial strategy group last week are aware of this approach, and it will come forward to council in due course, that if we can bridge it over 2 years, and I don't underestimate the difficulty of that, then that means we then have a really significant volume of service concessions, which we can invest in our communities, in our buildings, and in providing services or improving the facilities and therefore the services we provide to the public. So if we're going to do that, then that collaborative leadership piece is absolutely fundamental. And we've reported previously, not least in the context of the Best Value Review, about the collaborative leadership work we have done. We absolutely intend to build on that, to do whatever we can as a senior officer group and with the support of others to enable members to work across and through these really challenging issues that we face in order that we can get to that relatively early position of financial sustainability and therefore be able to invest in our communities and support the Falkirk plan and our council plan in delivering what I think all members want to see us deliver. Thank you.
Thank you, Kenneth. And my final point is around reserves and reserve strategy. The accounts quote a reserve of 54.7 million, and this is maybe for Amanda to explain that, particularly because this is a public meeting, that 54.7 million is not all available to be spent, and that is not something that can just be plugged in to fill the gap as one-off the funding. So I think that's something that I think needs to be explained, but also to have that reserve strategy going forward, and to when we're likely to see something like that coming to us.
Thank you. So just as Pauline outlined in her presentation, the reason that reserves look so much higher is because they now include the service concessions, and we've talked quite exhaustively with members about the service concessions, emphasising the fact that they have to be backed by borrowing, and therefore there's a cost involved. So this is not funding that is easily available. It's not a pot of cash sitting within the council's reserves. I think reserves is a really tricky area that's getting discussed nationally at the moment in terms of how do you best present reserves and the messages of reserves, because the nature of the council's accounts are that there's quite a lot of technical unusable reserves. There's lots of reserves in there that are not financially related in the sense that there's no cash behind them. So I think there is a sort of wider debate on that. The management commentary in the accounts tries to sort of reconcile the sort of technical accounts to the information that we give to members as part of our budget and as part of our executive budget monitoring. reports. And so on page 87, for example, it talks about we have an uncommitted general fund balance of 11.8 million. So that we've reported that to members. That is still the case. That is what we have available. So that kind of just tries to bridge that kind of gap between the accounts and the monitoring statements. I think we recognize, I mean, I've sort of, when in my discussions with the auditors, had recognised that yes, we haven't created a standalone document in terms of a reserves policy, but there has been since 2012 repeated sort of changes, discussions, papers. It's been brought to members as part of a budget report, for example, and so I do think that we have quite a clear approach to reserves, and the points that Kenneth's made in terms of service concessions, I think we've got a very clear approach to that. We've got an agreement in principle for setting aside an element of that funding, etc., etc. My proposal would be, I'm not quite bottomed it out, but that we bring an annual update to the reserves policy, either as part of our budget report in February, March time, or as part of our financial strategy. Now, obviously, we've just missed the financial strategy, so it's just trying to work out where it sits best. But I think for next year, it will probably be part of the budget report, just to make sure that we're capturing it. So that's our proposal at this point. Thanks.
Okay, thank you for that. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you, Councillor Mason-John. Thank you, Kenneth. Thank you, Amanda. Councillor Hannah.
Thank you, Convener. Just going into the more specific area of the use of reserves from the housing revenue account, the report details a deficit of 3.3 million, which was met by the accumulated HRA balance. What steps are being taken to ensure that the housing revenue account operates within budget, particularly given we know the increased demands because of homelessness, the increased demands because there is a recognised housing crisis? How are we going to ensure that the housing revenue account operates within budget?
Karen.
Yes, thank you, Convener. Convener, there is a significant level of work underway within the housing revenue account to ensure that that actually happens. So you'll appreciate that some of those areas, and we've talked about this before at committee, have come from increased costs of materials, wide variety of different reasons for that overspend actually happening. So we have been looking at alternative ways to deliver the services that we do through housing, whether that be more in-house delivery through our BMD team for repairs, etc., albeit recognising that our priority has to be on the housing emergency at this point in time. And that absolutely has to be the focus of the team. So less use of contractors in that area is what we've done to try and bring some of those costs down, more use of our BMD internal staff to actually do some of that work. But we're also looking at all aspects of spend right across housing to look at how can we reduce spend in any of these areas, but still maintain the services that we deliver. Ultimately, that money is tenants' money to be spent on housing properties, and we need to make sure that we're spending that as efficiently as we possibly can. So we've also undertaken a review of our performance within the repairs and emergency repairs team. So we're looking at that, and we're starting a review now of some of the areas of housing, and that work's been done as well. So a wide range to make sure that we get back on track for that.
Apologies. I was just going to add to that the budget for 24-25 did assume a use of reserves. So it was just to sort of say that when you see the executive report coming forward for December, it will show that there is still a proposed use of reserves. That's what was in the budget. We are looking to see if we can minimise that as much as possible, and that's all the work that Karen is referring to. But I suppose just to flag up that use of reserves is what was approved within the budget. So if we're using reserves again in 24-25, it's not as a result of a kind of overspend. It's a planned use of reserves.
Thank you, Amanda.
Thank you, Convener. Yes, I wasn't trying to suggest that it had been an inappropriate use, but it is a concerning use given the size of the budget. That's quite a significant figure. Next question is in relation to the performance. The report measured, it looked at the performance against 93 indicators, but on page 45, it notes that for 13% of the indicators, there was no supporting data. Can I have some clarity as to why this is the case? And without data, how are we in any way going to be able to monitor our performance against these indicators? And what are we going to be doing to ensure that we have the data that we need?
Amanda?
Yeah, so my understanding is that the audit report is referring back to the June report, the report that was presented in June. And at that point, we were recognising that, for example, we wouldn't have any of the schools data because we wouldn't have any of the attainment figures. So we recognised that there were gaps, and we've discussed how we change our reporting timetable to make sure that our year-end report is much more comprehensive and is timed more effectively so that it's capturing all the information at that point in time. So I think we had tried to aim, we had presented the report in June, which was sort of 3 months from the financial year end. But as I say, there's particularly education attainment information isn't available until August, September time. So that was the majority of the gap.
Yeah, cool. Thank you, Amanda. Karen?
Convener, just to add to that we did provide a year-end report that provided all of that data subsequent to that committee meeting. So members should have that, and that will be published on our Falkirk Performance website as well.
Thanks, Karen. Councillor Hannah?
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Convener. Just on another topic, on page 46, the report details areas where targets have not been achieved. One of them is in relation to staff sickness absence, excluding teachers. Can we have a little more information about this? What the level of staff sickness absence has been, and how far we're missing our targets, and what actions are being taken to ensure that in the future we do actually meet those targets.
Convener, I'm happy to come in on that, if that's okay. So the staff sickness absence, as we've seen across the local government benchmarking framework, has increased across most councils, not all, but most councils. And you may have seen some information in press over the last week or so about the general increase of sickness absence in general. So we're not immune to that, but you're absolutely right to raise it because we need to be taking every action that we can. So we now have quarterly reports that come to CMT. In fact, we've got one coming to CMT this week on the actions that we're taking. We've agreed a number of steps to look at how we can reduce that, how we can support staff back to work, but equally how we can support managers to manage those sickness absence situations. So there's a wide range of actions that we are taking at corporate management team with support from our HR colleagues to be able to try and reduce those sickness absence levels. But it's absolutely something that we need to try and get under control. You're absolutely right to raise it.
Thank you, Karen.
Okay, thank you, Convener.
Thank you. Is there any more questions, Councillor Forrest?
Thank you, Convener. The audit found that due to the absence of registers of interest for senior officers, there is a risk that undisclosed interests could impact or be perceived as impacting decision-making across the council. What progress has been made in this?
Karen?
Back to you.
Yeah, thank you, Convener. Convener, that is something that we are actively now developing. We do have, it's worth saying that we do have a register of extramural employment for all officers, but the request from the auditors as part of our report goes slightly beyond that. So it's about more than just extramural employment, and that is being developed. It's for members and officers. not just senior officers, but members as well. So we will be developing that, and that will come forward to members for agreement for that to then be implemented as soon as possible.
Thank you for that, Karen. I look forward to it. Thank you.
Does anyone else have any questions? No. Can we agree the report?
Agreed.
Agreed.
And are we happy to accept the accounts?
Agreed.
I thank you for your time, ladies and gentlemen, especially the officers and the time and effort they've put into all reports today. I now conclude this meeting. Thank you.